I'm recording this at 3:14 a.m. from my secure office because 6 hours ago I received intelligence briefings that made my blood run cold. What I'm about to share with you represents the most dangerous nuclear crisis since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Because while the world has been focused on Iranian economic collapse and Russian military support, something far more terrifying has been happening in underground facilities across Iran. Their nuclear program has accelerated to weapons capability faster than anyone predicted. We're not talking about 12 months to nuclear weapons anymore, we're talking about 12 weeks, maybe less. And that timeline has triggered the most intensive military coordination between Israel and America since the Six-Day War of 1967. Right now, in secure facilities from Tel Aviv to the Pentagon, Israeli and American military planners are updating invasion scenarios every 12 hours and preparing for the most complex nuclear strike operation in modern history. What I'm about to explain will fundamentally change how you understand the Iranian crisis. Because this isn't just about regime change or economic warfare anymore, this is about preventing nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of a collapsing regime that has nothing left to lose. And the window for preventing that scenario is closing faster than anyone wants to admit. The June 2025 intelligence breakthrough. To understand why Israel and America are preparing for immediate military action, you need to know what happened in the underground bunkers of Natanz and Fordo last June during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. When Israeli F-35 struck Iranian nuclear facilities on June 15, 2025, the operation wasn't just about destroying centrifuges and research equipment. Those strikes were designed to penetrate deep enough into underground facilities to allow Israeli intelligence to plant monitoring devices that could track Iranian nuclear activity in real time. For 6 months, those devices have been transmitting data that reveals the true scope of Iranian nuclear acceleration. Here's what Israeli and American intelligence services now know with certainty. Iran currently possesses 2,847 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. That's enough fissile material for 15 nuclear weapons if enriched to weapons-grade levels. Iranian centrifuges are operating at 127% of their designed capacity, using Chinese-supplied components that weren't destroyed in last year's strikes. Most critically, Iran has begun the technical processes for weaponization, not just uranium enrichment, but actual nuclear device assembly. Iranian nuclear scientists have been working 18-hour shifts since December 2025, using technical manuals and components that intelligence services believe were provided through Chinese front companies. The timeline for Iranian nuclear weapons capability has collapsed from 18 months in 2024 to 8 to 12 weeks as of January 2026. That acceleration explains why Israeli military exercises have shifted from defensive preparations to offensive strike planning, and why American carrier groups are positioning themselves for sustained combat operations rather than deterrent demonstrations. The Nat and Za revelation. But here's what makes the situation truly terrifying. Iranian nuclear acceleration isn't happening despite their regime's collapse. It's happening because of their regime's collapse. 3 weeks ago, Israeli intelligence intercepted communications between Supreme Leader Khamenei and Iranian Atomic Energy Organization officials that revealed the regime's nuclear strategy. According to these intercepts, Iranian leadership has concluded that nuclear weapons represent their only guarantee of regime survival against American military action. The logic is coldly rational. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons before their economy completely collapses, they can use nuclear deterrence to force American negotiation rather than military intervention. If Iran fails to acquire nuclear weapons before regime collapse, American military action becomes inevitable and Iranian resistance becomes futile. This creates what nuclear strategists call a use it or lose it dynamic applied to weapons development rather than weapons employment. The Iranian regime knows they're in a death spiral. They can see the economic mathematics as clearly as anyone, but they've calculated that nuclear weapons can transform their death spiral into American caution about military intervention. The problem is that this calculation is exactly backwards from Israeli and American perspectives. From Israeli viewpoint, Iranian nuclear weapons capability represents an existential threat that justifies immediate military action regardless of cost or consequence. From American perspective, Iranian nuclear weapons in the hands of a collapsing regime represents a nightmare scenario that requires prevention through any means necessary. Iranian nuclear acceleration designed to deter military action is actually guaranteeing military action. The Pentagon-IDF fusion. What's happening right now between American and Israeli military planning represents unprecedented intelligence and operational coordination. Since October 2025, Israeli Defense Forces have established permanent liaison offices inside the Pentagon, CENTCOM headquarters in Florida, and U.S. Strategic Command in Nebraska. American military planners have reciprocal presence at IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, Israeli Air Force bases, and Mossad facilities. This isn't normal alliance cooperation, this is operational fusion for joint military campaign planning. The scope of coordination includes target identification, combined intelligence operations, identifying every Iranian nuclear facility, research center, uranium storage site, and weapons development location. Strike planning, synchronized timing for Israeli and American attacks to overwhelm Iranian air defenses and ensure complete target destruction. Battle damage assessment, real-time coordination to evaluate strike effectiveness and identify targets requiring follow-up attacks. Escalation management, joint planning for Iranian retaliation against Israeli cities and American bases throughout the region. Post-strike operations, coordination for potential ground operations to secure nuclear materials if aerial strikes prove insufficient. The level of Israeli-American military integration now exceeds what existed during any previous Middle Eastern conflict. But this coordination also reveals something troubling about the timeline. Both countries are preparing for immediate military action because both intelligence services believe Iranian nuclear timeline has accelerated beyond diplomatic solution. The Chinese nuclear connection. Here's where the story gets truly complex. While China abandoned Iran economically and diplomatically, Chinese entities have continued supporting Iranian nuclear development through mechanisms that are technically legal but strategically devastating. Over the past 18 months, Chinese companies have sold Iran approximately $340 million worth of dual-use nuclear technology through third-party brokers and shell companies. This technology includes advanced centrifuge components, Chinese-manufactured parts that allow Iranian centrifuges to operate beyond design capacity, computer modeling software, Chinese nuclear simulation programs that accelerate weapons design calculations, specialized metallurgy, Chinese alloys and materials required for nuclear device construction, electronic components, Chinese-made electronics essential for nuclear weapon triggering systems. None of these sales technically violated international sanctions because they were structured as civilian nuclear technology purchases through multiple intermediaries, but the cumulative effect has been accelerating Iranian nuclear weapons capability by an estimated 2 to 3 years. Chinese nuclear technology support explains how Iran has maintained nuclear development despite Israeli strikes, economic collapse, and international isolation. From American and Israeli perspectives, Chinese nuclear technology transfers constitute acts of proliferation that threaten regional security regardless of Chinese intentions. This creates enormous complications for military planning. Striking Iranian nuclear facilities might be insufficient if Chinese technology allows rapid reconstruction of nuclear capabilities. Preventing Iranian nuclear weapons might require preventing Chinese nuclear technology transfers, which could trigger broader economic warfare between America and China. The Fordow dilemma. The most challenging aspect of any military operation against Iran involves the Fordow facility, a uranium enrichment plant buried 250 feet underground inside a mountain near the holy city of Qom. Fordow contains approximately 40% of Iranian uranium enrichment capacity and serves as the backup facility if other nuclear sites are destroyed. The facility is protected by multiple layers of air defenses, hardened against conventional bombing, and positioned adjacent to religious sites that make targeting politically sensitive. Most critically, Fordow is deep enough underground that even American bunker-busting weapons might not achieve complete destruction. Israeli and American military planners have spent months developing solutions to the Fordow problem. The options under consideration reveal the scope of potential military action. Option 1, repeated conventional strikes using the largest bunker-penetrating weapons in American arsenal, followed by ground operations to confirm destruction. Option 2, low-yield nuclear weapons designed specifically for deep underground target destruction. Option 3, conventional invasion to secure the facility and physically remove nuclear equipment and materials. Each option carries enormous risks and unpredictable consequences. Conventional strikes might prove insufficient, allowing Iranian nuclear development to continue in hardened facilities. Nuclear weapons use would trigger global political crisis and set precedent for nuclear conflict in populated areas. Ground invasion would require sustained military occupation of Iranian territory with enormous costs in casualties and resources. The The Fordo dilemma explains why military planning has expanded from surgical strikes to comprehensive campaign preparation. The Netanyahu calculation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces the most consequential decision of his political career, whether to authorize military action that could trigger regional war or accept Iranian nuclear weapons capability that could threaten Israeli existence. For Netanyahu, this isn't a difficult choice. Israeli strategic doctrine since 1967 has maintained that Israel will not permit hostile neighbors to acquire nuclear weapons capability regardless of cost. Israeli military action against Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981 and Syrian nuclear facility in 2007 established precedent for preventive strikes against nuclear programs. But Iranian nuclear program presents challenges that didn't exist in previous Israeli operations. Geographic distance. Iranian nuclear facilities are 1,000 plus miles from Israeli bases, requiring aerial refueling and extended flight times that increase operational risks. Air defense systems. Iranian air defenses are more sophisticated than Iraq 1981 or Syria 2007, requiring suppression operations that expand mission scope. Retaliation capability. Iran can respond to Israeli strikes with ballistic missile attacks against Israeli cities and proxy attacks through Hezbollah and other militant groups. Regional escalation. Iranian retaliation could trigger broader Middle Eastern war involving multiple countries and American military forces. Netanyahu has concluded that these risks are acceptable compared to the risks of Iranian nuclear weapons. But Netanyahu also understands that Israeli military capabilities alone might be insufficient for comprehensive nuclear program destruction. This is why Israeli-American coordination has become so intensive. Netanyahu needs American military support to guarantee mission success, and Trump needs Israeli intelligence and regional expertise to minimize American casualties. The Trump doctrine on nuclear proliferation. Trump's approach to the Iranian nuclear crisis reveals something fundamental about how his administration views nuclear proliferation in the modern era. During his first presidency, Trump withdrew America from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed maximum economic pressure. That strategy successfully constrained Iranian nuclear development for several years. But Iranian economic desperation has eliminated the effectiveness of sanctions-based non-proliferation. When regimes face existential threats, they accelerate nuclear weapons development regardless of economic costs. Trump's current strategy represents evolution from economic pressure to military prevention. The Trump doctrine on nuclear proliferation appears to be countries will not be permitted to acquire nuclear weapons if they pose direct threats to American allies or American interests, regardless of the military action required for prevention. This represents significant escalation from previous American non-proliferation policies that relied primarily on diplomatic pressure and economic sanctions. But Trump's calculation is based on analysis of what happens when hostile regimes acquire nuclear weapons. They become effectively immune to military pressure and can engage in regional aggression, protected by nuclear deterrence. North Korea's nuclear weapons program provides the template for what Iran could become, a hostile regime that threatens American allies while using nuclear deterrence to prevent American military response. Trump is determined to prevent Iranian replication of the North Korean model. The timing coordination. The most critical aspect of Israeli-American military coordination involves timing of operations to maximize effectiveness while minimizing escalation risks. Iranian nuclear timeline creates a narrow window for effective military action. If Iran achieves weapons capability before strikes occur, military action becomes exponentially more dangerous. But military action before Iranian nuclear timeline becomes critical might appear disproportionate to international observers and trigger unwanted diplomatic consequences. Israeli and American planners are coordinating timing for optimal effectiveness. Phase 1. Intelligence operations to confirm Iranian nuclear status and identify all target locations. Phase 2. Diplomatic preparation to ensure Allied support or at least non-interference with military operations. Phase 3. Military positioning to enable sustained operations if Iranian retaliation requires extended campaign. Phase 4. Simultaneous strikes against all Iranian nuclear facilities to prevent backup capability activation. Phase 5. Battle damage assessment and follow-up operations to ensure complete program destruction. Phase 6. Containment operations to manage Iranian retaliation and prevent regional escalation. The coordination window requires launching operations before Iranian nuclear weapons capability becomes operational, but after sufficient preparation to ensure mission success. Current intelligence assessments suggest that window exists between February 15th and April 1st, 2026. The Hezbollah factor. Any military action against Iran automatically triggers retaliation through Iran's most capable proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Despite Israeli operations against Hezbollah leadership during 2025, the organization retains approximately 50,000 rockets and missiles capable of reaching Israeli population centers. Hezbollah retaliation for strikes against Iran could involve missile bombardment, thousands of rockets targeting Israeli cities, infrastructure, and military bases. Ground infiltration, Hezbollah commandos crossing Lebanese border for attacks against Israeli communities. Sleeper cell activation, Hezbollah operatives in Europe, South America, and elsewhere conducting terrorist attacks against Israeli and American targets. Naval operations, Hezbollah naval units attempting to attack Israeli ports and offshore energy facilities. Israeli military planning for Iranian strikes includes simultaneous operations against Hezbollah to prevent or minimize retaliation capability. This requirement expands Israeli military operations from surgical strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities to comprehensive campaign against Iranian proxy network. The scope expansion explains why Israeli military exercises have involved full mobilization scenarios rather than limited strike preparations. The Strait of Hormuz scenario. Iranian retaliation for nuclear strikes would almost certainly include attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz, through which 30% of global oil shipments pass daily. Iranian closure of the strait would trigger immediate American military response to reopen shipping routes, expanding military operations from nuclear strikes to naval warfare. Economic consequences of strait closure would be immediate and global. Oil prices, global crude prices would spike to $200 plus per barrel within hours. Supply chain disruption, Asian manufacturing would slow dramatically as energy costs become prohibitive. Financial market chaos, global stock markets would collapse as investors flee risk assets. Economic recession, major economies would enter immediate recession as energy costs destroy consumer spending. American military planning for Iranian strikes includes contingencies for sustained naval operations to maintain Strait of Hormuz access throughout any Iranian retaliation. Naval requirements explain why American carrier groups are positioning for extended combat operations rather than brief strike missions. The Russian response calculation. Russian support for Iran creates enormous complications for any Israeli-American military operations. Russian military advisors, intelligence operatives, and private military contractors operating in Iranian territory or adjacent countries could become casualties during Israeli-American strikes. Russian casualties during American-led operations would trigger demands for Russian retaliation that could escalate beyond Middle Eastern conflict. Putin's response to Iranian strikes depends on several factors. Scale of Russian casualties, limited casualties might produce diplomatic protests. Significant casualties could trigger military retaliation. Russian strategic interests, Putin's assessment of whether Iranian regime survival justifies risking direct confrontation with America. Ukrainian conflict status, Russian military capacity for additional commitments depends on Ukrainian war requirements. Chinese support, Russian escalation likelihood increases if China provides diplomatic or economic backing for Russian retaliation. Israeli and American planners are coordinating operations to minimize Russian casualties while achieving nuclear program destruction. But combat operations against defended targets in areas where Russian personnel operate inevitably create risks for unintended escalation. The nuclear materials security crisis. The most dangerous aspect of any military action against Iran involves securing nuclear materials during regime collapse. Iran possesses approximately 2,800 kilograms of enriched uranium, enough for multiple nuclear weapons stored across numerous facilities. Military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities could scatter radioactive materials across large geographic areas, creating environmental disasters and security crises. More dangerously, Iranian regime collapse could leave nuclear materials unsecured and available for theft by terrorist organizations or criminal networks. Israeli and American military planning includes specialized units trained in nuclear materials security and transport, but nuclear security operations require sustained presence in Iranian territory to locate, secure, and remove all weapons-grade materials. Nuclear materials security might require American ground operations even if initial strikes are conducted primarily by Israeli forces. The point of no return. I'm going to tell you something that keeps nuclear security experts awake at night. We may have already passed the point where diplomatic solutions can prevent Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition. Iranian nuclear timeline has accelerated beyond the pace of diplomatic negotiation or economic pressure. Iranian regime desperation has eliminated their responsiveness to traditional nonproliferation incentives. Chinese nuclear technology support has provided Iran with capabilities that survive economic sanctions and limited military strikes. Russian political support has reduced Iranian fears of international isolation following nuclear weapons development. The combination of these factors has created a situation where military action may be the only remaining option for preventing Iranian nuclear weapons capability. But military action against Iranian nuclear program carries risks that could trigger broader regional war involving multiple nuclear-armed countries. In our next episode, we need to examine why American Special Operations Forces are conducting training exercises in countries that border Iran, why European allies are quietly preparing for massive refugee flows, and why the global oil market is already pricing in military conflict regardless of official diplomatic statements. Because what happens when military prevention of nuclear proliferation meets Russian desperation, meets Chinese economic calculations, meets Iranian regime collapse all at the same time? The answer will determine whether we're heading toward the most successful non-proliferation operation in modern history or the beginning of the largest nuclear crisis since World War II. The countdown to military action has begun and nobody can stop it.